and welcome back to the Jodie Makes podcast. Hi, my name's Jodie. I'm a maker based in the northwest of England, and I'm here today with a regular format podcast to give you an update on my projects. If you do enjoy today's video, I'd love it if you gave the video a like and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see any more of my videos. That really helps the channel out. Before we touch on what I've been working on, I did just quickly want to talk about what I'm wearing, as this is something that I've made. This is the Tendril sweater by the Knit Pearl Girl, or Sophie Hemmings. Made this jumper in 2024, I believe. I think this was one of the first things that I made that I've actually kept and that I think is quite wearable. I made it using Drops Air in the magenta shade, and I think it's held up quite well. It's a drop shoulder construction, so the standard sort of trapezoidal shape on the back, pick up the shoulders. There's this really nice sort of geometric graphic cabling motif on the shoulder seams here, and I liked that this was it was cabling, but it's not very traditional cable-y cables. I do really love this jumper. I think it's great for those sort of colder days. It is probably a little bit too warm for it today, if I'm completely honest. It's more of a deep winter sort of coming into spring item, and today's just like a slightly colder spring day in the UK, and I really love the colour. One thing that I would say about this project is that it definitely has lost some structure throughout wear. I think most notably in the neckline, so this has drooped quite considerably. I am actually considering taking this neckline off and re-knitting it and maybe putting some elastic in there as well. But I also think that there's some issues with the hem now where everything's sort of dropped, and the back in particular is really long compared to the front. And so this is technically on my to mend pile, but I do sort of wear it every now and again regardless. So with that out of the way, let's get into the project updates, and I want to start off this week with a finished object. So with me having a finished object this week, you might be thinking that I'm about to hold up my camisole number 7 inspired project, but unfortunately that is still with us. And instead, my finished object this week is a brand new cast on. So the project that I have finished is the Stick Season Sweater Kids by Rebecca Clow. I made this in the 6-month size. The baby's due round about nowish, so summer baby, and they're definitely not going to be needing any sort of heavy knitwear in any smaller sizes. And so I thought I'd just make this in the size that they're hopefully going to get into sort of tail end of this year when we're getting into the winter time. So the Stick Season Sweater by Rebecca Clow typically has this sort of stick inspired motif across the upper half of the jumper. I've chosen to omit this because I'm hoping to do some sort of crochet chain embroidery to put a name on the front of this. So this jumper is for my sister who is having a baby, the same sister who I made a Yorkshire blanket for quite recently. When I made the Yorkshire blanket, I had 2 balls of Knit Crafts Make the Change in cream in stash, and I went to my local Howie Craft. I bought 2 more balls of that. I thought that that would be exactly what I needed. And in my last update, you'll have seen that I ran out of yarn basically on the last round of that, and I had to go and buy a whole new skein. It was one of those where I was short by enough that I definitely had to buy more yarn for it, but I essentially ended up with an entire 100-gram skein of this left. And I was really keen to just get that out of stash. I didn't really want to hold on to that, and I just find it a little bit demotivating that I had to buy a whole 100-gram skein just to finish that off, when originally that project was intending to get 200 grams out of my stash. And so essentially by making that Yorkshire blanket, I'd only actually decreased my stash by 100 grams. I think I've got something like 20 grams of the Make the Change left after I finish this, but I just thought that that would be a cute little something to go along with the blanket. And like I said, I'm just going to use another DK weight acrylic scrap just to embroider the baby's name onto there. Baby's not with us yet, so I don't know what name that is going to be, and we also don't know the sex, so I can't even make any sort of educated guesses on that front. So I just wanted to make something that was pretty gender neutral in colour. Just quickly on the stats, like I say, I made this out of Knit Crafts Make the Change yarn in the shade Cream. I used around, I think it was 85 grams of this, and I'm not counting any yarn costs for this because the yarn was left over from the Yorkshire blanket, and I did count the whole yarn cost towards that project the first time around. This is the first time I've used this pattern, and I bought it on the offer that Rebecca had when she launched it. I think she launched 3 or 4 kids patterns towards the beginning of the year, and they were on some kind of, I can't remember if it was 3 for 2 or 4 for 3 kind of offer. But ultimately this pattern cost me £3.33, and so I have counted that towards this. Well, in all, a grand project total of £3.33. I've got a couple of projects that I'm not going to talk about in any sort of detail. So as you know, I've got my Minot cardigan that is still on hold. Another project that I've still got on hold is my granny square sort of cardigan sweater. And one project that you're not going to hear about again is my cloud bow. I've ripped that out. I've decided that it wasn't really the project that I wanted to make, and I'm going to revisit that and just see what I'm going to do with that yarn. So I am still working on my camisole number 7 inspired project. So as I mentioned in my previous podcast, I'm not working from the pattern for this design. I am essentially recreating it by looking at the photos. And the reason why I'm doing that is because the pattern's not size inclusive. So there's not really any exciting news with regards to this project. I put a little progress keeper in last time I gave you an update. I did put the progress keeper in upside down, so you can't really see that it's a cute little cow. But I got these little cow stitch markers for Christmas. And I have done, I don't even think I've done 10 centimetres, you know, which is absolutely devastating for the amount of time that I've spent on this project. It is firmly in the it's a total slog to work on stage of being a knitting project. And frustratingly, I love it. I just love the finished piece. I think there's plenty of drape. I think it's opaque enough. I love the stitch pattern. I think it's amazing. I love the colour. I love the the weighting of it. I think it's like heavy enough without being too heavy. I think it's going to be really appropriate for summer in the cotton. I just really don't like that I had to knit it on a 2mm needle. I think the stitch pattern is just engaged enough that I can't just sort of like, I think when you've got something that's on really tiny needles but it's stockinette, because you're just knitting all around and you don't really need to pay attention to anything, I think it feels like it's going faster than it actually is because you're not really paying attention. I think because this is even a pattern where it was like Andalusian stitch, if you had to do that on a small needle where it's like 3 rounds of knit and then 1 round of knit purl, I think that feels like it's going quicker because you're not having to like be so conscious every single row. But because with this, even though it is knitting for a whole row and then knit purl sort of rib stitch for 1 row, because you have to change the stitch pattern every single row, you have to be really conscious of every single row that you finish. It feels like it's taken ages. I mean, the other reason why it feels like it's taken ages is because I think it's 3 rows per centimetre, so you know, there is that. But like I say, not really anything interested on this. This is just going to be the sort of death by 1,000 cuts type project. I'm really hoping that I can get it finished this month so that it's like ready for the summertime once the good weather hits. I've got a nice sort of goes with everything, plain colour, neutral, really nice textured camisole that I can wear with jeans, I can wear with shorts, I can wear with linen trousers. Yeah, I think it's going to be a really versatile piece, and I feel like it's going to be one of those where I absolutely wear it to death throughout the summer, and then I am going to be faced with having to make more of them, which, you know, not super excited about that. Super excited to own the finished item, not super excited about working on it, not gonna lie. One thing that I am now having to think about with this project though is I bought 4 skeins of yarn for this. There's 3 skeins already in it. This is what's left of the final skein, and I am currently, I don't think the body's even 20 centimetres long yet, and so there is a possibility that I am playing yarn chicken on this because I have just sort of winged it and I'm not necessarily working to the specific gauge of the original pattern or anything like that. I don't know exactly how much yarn that I need. I do have, I think it's a little over half a skein of this yarn in this colour, but from a different dye lot, and when I hold them together I do think the colour's different enough that you would tell. So what I'm currently doing is the bury your head in the sand method, where you just keep knitting and hope that the yarn doesn't run out before the project finishes. One thing I was thinking was that if I get to the end of this ball and it's like a centimetre shorter than I'd have preferred, do I just knit to the very end of this and then finish the final row and do the bind off with the one of these that's in a slightly different colour, and would it be less noticeable if it was literally just that bind off section? The other option I've got is I place a yarn order and I buy another ball. I'd really rather not do that. And then the final option that I've got would be to do some sort of blending. So with that other skein that I've got, if I get like to a point where I know that this isn't going to be enough to finish it, I could start trying to blend the other one in. I think I'm just going to continue with the bury your head in the sand method and hope that that works out. And ultimately, if that does bite me on the bum, I might just have to rip out and go for option 3. Yeah, but I think that's just adding to the pain of working on this. Like, it's really slow going, it's really small needles, it's a lot of knitting, but I'm also like, am I going to get to a point on this where I'm going to struggle to finish it because I'm going to run out of yarn? And then we go from knitting pain to pure unadulterated knitting joy. This is my Salty Days sweater and I am obsessed. I love everything about this. I think it's great to work on. I think I'm gonna love the finished object. Again, love the fabric. I think that this fabric is probably actually even better than the fabric of the camisole number 7ish. The drape on this is absolutely beautiful. I love this yarn. I think working it up at this sort of gauge is perfect. Yeah, so just love working on this. And at the end of the last video, I think I'd gotten to a completed back panel, and I have now picked up over the shoulders, completed those, joined at the front, joined it in the round, and then I have also completed the next section of the pattern. So one thing that I said in my last video about this that I really love was the fact that it is so segmented and so broken up. Every single section is its own thing. So in the pattern, like this rib section is its own section, and then this sort of garter bump eyelet row is its own little section, and then this lace motif is its own section. You get that sort of feeling of progress. Like, it's the complete opposite to this. Where this is, I've done all of the interesting stuff at the top and I'm now just sort of working this big long section of doing the same thing over and over again. This is like little tiny snippets that make you feel like you're progressing really quickly. And I think the more I work on this, the more I'm realising that that is something that's really quite important to me in my knitting projects, that I feel like I'm making progress. And so those little sort of progress milestones are really good. And I think that that is why I love a drop shoulder in general over something like a raglan, because there is so many stop-start points. And I don't know if everybody else gets that. I think that's a little bit of an unusual thing. I feel like a lot of knitters complain about how stop-start a drop shoulder is, but I think that's one of the things that appeals to me most, that you get these little sprinklings of like feeling like you get these little milestones as you go through it. You know, I get to the bottom of the back panel and I feel like I've accomplished something. I finish one of the sides and I feel like I've accomplished something. So because you've got so many little stop-start sections in there, I just find it really motivating. So like I say, I've finished the lace motif on the top fronts, and I've moved into the, I don't know how well I'm going to be able to show this, but I've done the cable motif that goes round. Now again, I have had to make a few modifications to this because I'm working at a different gauge to what the pattern intends. So the first modification, like I say, I've used a DK weight yarn. This recommends a DK weight and a fingering weight held together, or a worsted held single. And so the first thing that I did, I think I've sized up twice. I think I should be knitting an extra large based on my bust circumference, and I've cast on a 3XL, and that has meant that I've had to do some jiggery pokery. So I've actually done a lot more on this than it appears to, because like I say, at the end of the last video I'd finished the back panel. The back panel finishes at the end of this sort of second iteration of the eyelet lace. So you do the rib stitch for the trapezoidal shape, you then do the eyelet section, you then do the sort of eyelet lace sort of diamond shape bit, and then you do another row of the eyelet sort of motif, another iteration of that. And then you put it on hold, you pick up the two shoulders, you work those, you join them together at the front, still working flat. You work those three sort of, the eyelet motif, the diamond shaped lace motif, and then the eyelet motif again, and then you connect everything in the round to do the cable motif. So I did all of that, and then I got the first two rows connected in the round done, and then I tried it on because that was the first point that I really could try it on. And I felt that there just wasn't enough room in the armhole. So I did think that the back was going to be a little bit short. That's something that I mentioned in my last video. And so one thing that I did do when I joined at the front, I worked 4 extra rounds, or 4 extra rows than what the pattern told me to make the front a little bit longer. And even though I'd already done that by the time that I joined together in the round, it still felt like the armhole was a bit short, and specifically it felt like it was pulling up at the back. And so what I had to do at that point was rip the 2 rounds of it having been joined in the round apart, and I still hadn't cut the yarn on the back because I thought that this was going to happen anyway. So I then had to lengthen the back panel, but because the back panel has the same, you know, it's the same on the front as it is on the back, if I'd have just put a few more rounds on the bottom of that eyelet motif, it would have looked funky. And so what I had to do was rip all of the lace section back, and then I added 4 extra rounds into the rib section, and then I had to re-knit those 3 sort of eyelet lace, diamond lace motifs, and then rejoin it in the round. So I probably could have finished the body on this week, or this time around, if I hadn't had to do all of that. But I did, and I'm much happier now with the armhole depth. That is the type of armhole that I am used to seeing. I've lost a load of stitches again. This is one thing with this project. I like this yarn. I like it on the metal needles. I think it's like nice to work on, but my god is it slippy, and my god does it fall off all the time. But yeah, I think that is a good size armhole depth for a drop shoulder for me. It does come a little bit further down, so that was the other thing of like, I'd rather it be a little bit too big than a little bit too small on the armhole, because if it's too big on the armhole, it just means that the sleeve is a bit wider at the top, which I can live with, but I don't want it up in my armpit if it's too small. So yeah, I'm really happy with how this is working up. I suppose one decision that I do have to make soon. So I have done, like I say, I've finished the cable motif, and I've done the next eyelet lace motif, which I love working, they're really satisfying. I think what the pattern has you do next is go back to this 2x1 rib detail and do a big section of that. So again, I'll be able to add a little bit of length stealthily there to help me sort of keep my row gauge accounted for. And then I think there's another eyelet motif, and then I think there's some ribbing at the bottom, and then that's the final length. Before I get to the final length, I do want to add the collar, but I need to decide what I'm going to do with that. So obviously this sweater is originally supposed to be sort of a traditional wool and mohair combination, like a wintry sweater, but I've cast it on in cotton to make it more appropriate for the summer. I think the original pattern has a double folded ribbed collar. I know that the one that I'm specifically inspired by, I've referenced this before, the one by Nora Knits, she did like a yellow summery one, and I think she used the eyelet motif in her collar. I don't know if I want to do that. I definitely want to keep it sort of summery. I just don't know what I'm going to do with the collar yet, and I need to make a decision on that because I want to put the collar on it before I finish the length, because the collar usually pulls it up a little bit. So I need to do that, and I also need to figure out what I want to do with that final hem. Again, in Nora's version, I don't think she did the final ribbing section, but I think I do want to do that on mine. Not only because of the length issue. So in terms of accounting for that row gauge, like I say, on the back and on the front, I did the extra 4 rows in the ribbing section. There wasn't really anything I could do with this lace motif. I didn't want to work it twice or anything like that. I thought that that would add too much. And again, there wasn't really anything I could do with the eyelet section. I have added an extra cable repeat. So I think in the pattern, there's just the 4 cable rounds, and I've done 5 on mine. So that's added a little bit of length. Again, I've got back to the eyelet motif, not really much I can do about adding some length there, but I will be able to add some length in the ribbing section quite easily. And it's just sort of mucking around and trying to keep it proportionate whilst also sort of sneaking that extra length in there where I can. And so I don't think I want to get rid of that final ribbing round, because I think it's going to be really difficult to keep things proportionate whilst I'm removing like a good sort of 3 centimeters from the bottom of the pattern basically. So I think I'm going to have to do that, which makes me think, do I just do like a single fold, not folded over, just like a as is standard ribbed collar on it? It's something that I'd love to just leave it to the end. There's a little bit of me that's like, maybe get to the final ribbing and then I put the body on hold, and then I pick up for the sleeves and I just see how it's starting to look once I put the sleeves on. Again, can't finish the sleeves without putting the collar on. But just thinking about the order that I'm going to continue on though with this, because I am getting to a point where I'm going to need to make a decision about the neckline. But yeah, that is my Salty Days sweater. Absolutely love this. I mean, I'm finding that there's a bit of a push and pull with this project, because on one hand, I'm really excited to finish it because I'm really looking forward to wearing it, but I'm also really sad to finish it because I'm really enjoying working on it. Probably going to have to cast on something similar with these sort of like repeats of texture and little sections in the future, because I'm just finding it so addictive to work on. And then another project that you've seen before is what is going to be a granny square beach bag, and I think I've finished the first panel. So this is the first granny square panel, and I've stopped at this point. I think this is the size that I'm going for. But what I am going to do is just try and finish the other panels and then see. So I started this project with 5 full skeins of the black and then 3 full skeins with a ball band on of the white, and what I thought was a 4th full skein of the white. But then when I've rechecked my stash tracker, it doesn't look like it was a full skein of the white. It was a little bit less than that. And when I made this, I did run out of the white and I've had to tap into a second ball of the white. I am pretty confident at this point that I'm not going to be able to get 5 granny squares out of the amount of yarn that I've got. That is fine though, because I was already planning to back this. So now I'm thinking, worst case scenario, I make 4 granny squares, and rather than sort of attaching them together and then attaching them to the bag, so you sort of have like the outer layer made out of granny squares and then like the lining of the bag affixed to the outside, there is a possibility where I'm going to have to make a fully lined bag and then affix these to the outside of it, just so that they're more decorative than actually functionally part of the bag. That's one option. The other option that I've got is I think I might have enough of the black yarn that I might be able to make a fully black square for the bottom, but I think I'm playing pretty significant yarn chicken for that. So I think the surefire option here is to just have the granny squares on the sides. I do think functionally that probably works better anyway, because the bottom of the bag is the one that's going to be, like, if I'm putting it down anywhere, that's the one that's going to be making contact with other surfaces. It's the one that's going to be most subject to wear and tear, and so actually not having the granny square on the bottom just stops it getting stuck and caught and things like that. So that might be a happy accident. Oh dear, oh, that's not good. I have just noticed there's a big hole formed where I clearly didn't leave enough of an end, and so, oh dear, it is actually fully unraveling. It's like it's the first round as well. Oh god, that's not good. I don't know how you fix that. Have I just made this whole granny square and trimmed all the edges and everything? And now it's gonna all unravel on me. Oh no. Okay, well that's the problem that I'm gonna have to deal with. That's what I'm currently thinking for my granny square bag. Just make the other granny squares, fix this one, and then affix them to the outside of a fully lined bag, rather than using this as sort of like the outer layer. And then the final project that I wanted to talk to you about today is a brand new cast on. This is something that I casted on yesterday, and I've made a lot of progress because it's really tiny, but it is another baby knit. And like I said earlier, when I finished the Stick Season Kids jumper, I had a really small amount of the Knitcraft Make the Change left, and I have this thing at the minute where I'm like, I just want to use up every single scrap. I don't want to leave little bits of leftovers, and I had like just shy of, I think it was around 15 grams left of this, and so I thought, I'll just try, like surely that's enough to get a hat. And so I casted on a 4th hat. Now the thing that I love about the 4th hat, this is one of the Ysolde Teague hat patterns, and I basically only knit Ysolde Teague hat patterns because they all have one amazing and unique thing in common, something that I haven't really seen in a lot of other hats, and that is that they all start top down. They're all worked top down. And I like this for hats because typically I make hats with leftovers. If I'm going to play yarn chicken, I do it with a hat because I knit them all top down. And so the thought process that I had here was, I've got about 15 grams of this. Hopefully that'll be enough for a full hat. If it's not, hopefully it will at least be enough for the head of the hat, and then I can use a different yarn for the brim. Now that I've gotten this far, I do know that I'm going to have at least enough to do the head, if not the whole hat. Like, I've got plenty left, and this is pretty tiny. Quite shocking to think that a human head would fit in something so small, but it definitely does. So I've got the 4th hat, I've got the Porty hat, I've got the Musselburgh, but the 4th hat is the stockinette with the ribbed brim. The fourth hat is a full ribbed beanie, and the Musselburgh is the one where you sort of knit the big tube hat and you feed it to itself, and then it's like a double thickness, double layer hat. One thing that I've noticed on all of them, I love the fact that they're gaugeless. You sort of knit the crown, the first few rounds of the crown, and then you measure your gauge from there. Is that in my experience, at least, every single time I've made one, I felt like I needed to follow the stitch counts for the gauge below what I measured my gauge at. So what I mean to say there is when I measured the gauge on this hat, I think it was coming out at 5.5 stitches per 2.5 centimeters, and I've actually followed the stitch counts for the 5 stitches gauge because I find that they always come out loose. Now, this might be a preference for me, but also for people in my life. Like, I just think that the hats come out loose when you follow the gauge, so I always make them one gauge size smaller, and I find that that is a much closer fit. I think what happens there is I tend to work with yarn that grows when you wash it, and so I think this is the trap that you fall into when you do something that's gaugeless and you just measure your gauge as you're working. The gauge that I get on my projects while I'm working on them isn't necessarily the finished gauge, and what I think is happening is the yarn's growing slightly and the gauge that I'm measuring when I'm working on it is about half a stitch bigger or smaller than it seems, and so the hat is then growing when I'm washing it, and then it's becoming too big. So as a side of caution, I always just follow, like I say, one gauge smaller or one gauge larger. I can never work out which is the right way there. Like, if it's more stitches per 10 centimeters, that's a smaller gauge, right? Even though the number's bigger. I always follow the stitch counts for the smaller gauge, just because I'm concerned about the hats coming out too big. And my thought process there is, if I knit a hat and it's slightly too small, I can stretch it out during the blocking process and usually force it to be a little bit bigger. But if I knit it and it's too big, there is very little I can do, especially on a yarn like this, like acrylic DK that's not feltable. There's very little that you can do other than a feltable yarn to make it any smaller. So I always err on the side of caution, try and make it a little bit smaller. I know that I can stretch it out if I need to. But all that to say, I've knit this, like, this is the smallest size, it's the baby size, and it's going to go alongside the jumper. So it did a couple of things. It's a nice little palette cleanser. It's one of those magic circumferences where I've got a little shorty set of charcoal needles, and this stitch count is like the perfect stitch count to just keep going in the round. I suppose the unfortunate thing is, because it's so small, you don't actually need to go that long, because this is one of those where I could just go round and round and round forever. Really pleasant to work on. It's going to use up pretty much every little scrap of this yarn that I've got, which is going to be very satisfying. It's going to make a nice little set for me to give to my sister, and it's really nice to work on. So, like, wins all around. I think the other thing that I really like about a top down hat is that they sort of become their own little project bag. You can keep the yarn in there and just sort of knit around, so they're really portable, especially if you're going to make one of the adult sizes and it ends up on your needles for a little bit longer, and they're a little bit deeper. They really start to function as their own little bag as you're working on them. And that's everything that I've got for you today. So if you did enjoy the video, I'd really appreciate it if you gave me a like, and you can subscribe to stick around and see what I'm doing in the future. It really does help the channel out. And other than that, I'll see you again soon. Bye!